Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. Today we have Michael Tanji, who is the Managing Director of WaPack Labs. And he's in charge of cyber intelligence and research and the production of their products over there. Just talking with him, they do some passive cyber, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the threat intel and intelligence area. Michael, welcome. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So I always like to start with, Mike, tell me about yourself. How did you get into security? How many years ago did you start? Did you work back in the original Bell Labs? Tell us something about yourself.
Well, I'm fairly old, but I'm not quite that old. I got involved in intelligence and security work in the Army in the mid to late 80s. I transitioned to an intelligence job in the federal government, where I stayed for I have a total of about 20 years of federal service. I left the government in 2005 to work in the private sector, and in that time I've started a couple of cybersecurity companies and done a wide variety of things. My background is in signals intelligence and human intelligence, and over the course of the years I picked up computer programming, system administration, and computer security skills along the way, and that has served me well.
So what about that? The time everybody wants to start with, I'm a technical person, when I went to school, what I did. What about that time before you were in intelligence? What made you come up to be the type of person that would want to go into that? What was little Mike like?
A hot mess. No, I'm a naturally very curious person and inquisitive. I also like to lose myself in the research and the discovery aspect of things. So I will chase things down rabbit holes as far as they will go, and that whether it's in computers or in intelligence work, that's a skill or a trait that has served me well, because it's very easy to look at things in a superficial fashion and come up with an answer that is convenient for you, but it's not necessarily the correct answer, and that's really what you get paid for is finding the correct answer, not the convenient one.
Yeah. So when I talk to younger people, a lot of times threat intelligence, they just don't know what that is. Once you've been in the military, you kind of know, for your Army background, you know the reason for it, what it is and everything. If you put yourself back in that mindset from before you went in the military, before you got into threat intelligence, what would you think that is, and how would you describe it to somebody at that age?
Sure. So it really, threat, when you boil it down to its essence, it's something that poses a danger to you, right? Some threats are more serious or dangerous than others. There's a threat of stubbing your toe, and then there's the threat of cutting your thumb off. Threat intelligence and the difference between those two is the methodology that you apply and the amount of thinking that you apply to those things to determine which one is which, and to help you make decisions about what you need to invest time and money and effort into avoiding. Stubbing your toe is not such a big deal. Cutting off your thumb, that would be super inconvenient for the rest of your life. So,
gotcha. That's interesting. So it's looking ahead at what's dangerous to you and preemptively doing something about it.
Right. When you boil it down to it, it's a decision making issue. It's something that is something you could be paralyzed by fear, right? Because you're worried about. In fact, some people are. Some people have conditions that they don't leave the house because they're afraid of a wide variety of things. Well, those people need help, and they're an extreme edge case. But if you're a parent. This is particularly important, right? If you're a parent, or if you look at generations of parents, right? Parents today, you could argue that the concept of the helicopter parent and that sort of thing, where they don't let kids out of their sight and that sort of thing because they're afraid of things that are going to hurt their kids. And then you look back to generations like wake up, you feed the kids, and off they go, and you don't see them till the evening, right? It's not that your parents or your grandparents didn't love you. It's just that it's a different environment, and it was a different world, a different way of viewing things.
Interesting.
So
it's something that we do. We already do. We know how to do it. It's just a study in it for the business and for security. So let's take a break, and we'll come back in a minute and talk some more with Mike.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
All right, welcome back. And we were talking before the break with Mike Tanji, who is into cyber threat intelligence, and he gave a good definition. I always like people to explain what they're doing and what if I explained this to a kid, what is my career in cyber? Because literally so many of us have there's so many different areas in cyber that it's hard for us to understand what's what, and all of us technical people talk in acronyms so often we just breeze right past that. So Mike, welcome back, and we wanted to kind of go into talking about what cyber intelligence is and what type of research you do. And we have so many students ask, this is an interesting field. I hear a lot about it. I want to get into it. Give us an example of what that is and what they would need to do to kind of move in that direction.
Sure. So cyber intelligence or cyber threat intelligence is really just it's the intelligence process and procedures that anyone can research. It's that information is widely available. It's used by the military and intelligence agencies, but with a focus on quote unquote cyber. So both internal and external data that you get from computers and the internet and networks. So same processes, same procedures, but the primary source of information is technical data. So that's it in a nutshell. The more valuable approach to this is to fuse that data with other sources of data. So this is something that's done in intelligence agencies as well, because you're trying to produce a more well-rounded or comprehensive picture of what's going on. Just a bunch of technical data, things can look, going back to that definition of threats and what's dangerous and what's sort of dangerous and what's really dangerous. A whole bunch of technical data that suggests something bad is happening could, in isolation, seem very, very bad. But when viewed holistically with information from a variety of sources, political, military, economic, social, it can kind of temper your assessment of what the actual problem is, or it could raise it depending on the situation. So,
yeah, and you're talking a lot in the government here and everything, but there's so many of these jobs and this career in threat intelligence that is transitioning now into the business world and non-government type of work. What do you recommend, and what do you see in that direction?
Sure. So it's important if you're interested in the intelligence business, whether it's in the government or the commercial sector, it's the same. Fundamentally, it's the same work. So the more research you do, and boning up on how the intelligence process, and how that process works, the better. That gives you a nice foundation of across the board of whatever you decide to pursue. The big thing in the commercial space is you're servicing a different type of decision maker. In the government, you're responding to general officers or senior executives in the executive branch who are making national security sort of decisions. In the business world, it's the CEO, maybe the CTO or the chief financial officer who you're trying to meet with and inform. You have to make sure you understand what their needs and requirements are. Okay, just going through the process and producing information and throwing it over the wall doesn't help, right? You need to view yourself as an asset that they tap, just like they do their head of sales, their head of marketing, their head of production and operations, to help make good decisions for the business. So it's important that you understand, what business you're getting into, what concerns they have, and how you can actually contribute to their success, as opposed to just being a supplier of information.
Interesting. So now you've been doing this for a while. You've been working with these CEOs, CFOs. Give us a top 5 things that they're interested in that you're bringing to them. Some examples from the real world.
Sure. So people want to know if they're the biggest thing from a financial perspective or CEO perspective is what sort of in return on their investment are they getting, and this is probably super hard. Most people have not figured this out, and there's no universal way of sorting this out. If you think about a business, you have sales for a reason. You produce a thing, and you have a sales team, and you have a marketing team, and all these things contribute to revenue and profits. But security is this thing that you spend money on, and you don't get anything out of it, right? You just get a guy who tells you that they need more money to buy more things to stop more evil, and you do that, and you still get compromised, right? And you still have to do forensics and incident response and all that stuff. So coming up with figuring out what's important to them, and configuring things in such a way and doing business in such a way that you can actually add some value, right? So why am I spending money on this? What does that get me, right? Does it stop more viruses? Does it detect more evil? And that is not necessarily useful because you don't necessarily have control over the inputs, so the outputs don't necessarily make sense. It's not a lower left, upper right diagram like most business people are used to seeing. So think about it in a different way. The money you spent on this means we stopped more systems from going down, so that operations were up more. We had to spend less money on incident response and forensics. Putting things into a business context is super useful for them, because that makes it easier when you do need money for more resources. It makes it easier for them because you've actually proven yourself to be of value, as opposed to this big sinkhole that they're pouring money down and they don't get anything out of.
Interesting. So
I think the other thing is.
So if and just to follow on with that, what things are you finding? Give us an example of something you found to prove what value was, what return on investment was being added for a particular thing, and how you did that. What do you look for?
Sure. So a recent case, actually, we were working with a company that does a lot of they get a lot of parts and components from a variety of suppliers overseas. And we monitor their entire supply chain, all the companies in their supply chain, for threats. And one of those suppliers actually had been compromised for several months, credentials from a user, and they were using that company not only had they siphoned off a bunch of money, but they were using that company's resources as a platform for other attacks. And it was actually impacting their production. So our primary customer, the U.S. customer, was actually incurring a lot of costs from the delays in shipping and the receipt of product. They couldn't put their larger products together because they didn't have these components. So threat intelligence in that case helped them identify a problem. We could help them resolve that problem. Those people could get back up to full production and get their parts flowing back to the States. So that right there, a revenue and a profit increase because threat intelligence was able to identify a problem. Now, if we hadn't done that, how would they have ever discovered that? How long would that problem have gone on? Probably for months, if most of the surveys are to be believed. So that would have been months of impacting their production and their numbers.
Interesting. So how did you know to go out and look for it? Did they come and say, hey, we're having these problems with too much cost and warranty, we're seeing something? What were their indicators that sent you out looking for that?
So it was a secondary effect. The primary purpose was to identify threats, technical threats to their enterprise and the enterprises of their customers.
Mm-hmm.
So we met that primary requirement. The secondary requirement was, we noticed in the course of the investigation, this is not just some back office stuff. This was also in their production system. So it was a this particular supplier was in a part of the world where they're not super keen on computer security. So things were a little laxer than they might be here. As a secondary effect, it was like, oh, well, no wonder we're not doing as well as we thought because of these issues that were going on. So it was a completely secondary effect to what our primary purpose was, and we actually turned that around. We have a couple of customers who have fairly elaborate supply chains, and we ended up doing the same thing for them, approaching them and saying, hey, look, here's what happened with this other customer, and do you want us to do that for your supply chain? Every one of them said yes, because every one of them is concerned that they all do business overseas, and they're all concerned that things are not up to snuff from a security perspective, and that could be, once we pointed out, we're not going to do this because of the cybers. We're going to do this because of profit. They all very quickly agree.
Change the tone
because that's something they're concerned about.
Yeah,
they're concerned about that.
Definitely. Well, let's take a break here, and we'll come back after these words from our sponsors.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Over 3 million data breaches happen every single day. That's over 2,000 records being compromised every minute. So often, we focus on securing web data access. But what if the attackers are already inside, having gained direct access to your storage through data management software? When it comes to communications that go directly into your storage devices, make SNIA your first line of protection. SNIA's conformance testing limits outdated communications that are known to be used by attackers. It works continuously behind the background to make sure your storage is protected. To find out if your data is truly secure, visit our website at www.snia.org/cybertest.
All right, we're back with Mike Tanji and talking about some work that they do for cyber supply chain and threat intelligence to look out for a company to what's going on with their suppliers and everything. That was a really interesting and good, business example of what we use threat intelligence for. And we were in the process of asking a couple of those. What are the top so many? I think that was one. Give us another one or two things that you actually help and find in the companies when you're looking in the corporate world to help them with, their business model or their security using threat intelligence.
Sure. So we do a fair amount of work with companies that supply the government with military equipment, and that's a world where I'm much more familiar with, and issues related to industrial espionage are primary concern there. But if you're Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, you have millions of dollars in budget. You're very aware of. You're very close to the customer, so you're very aware of the threat, and you can invest money in that sort of thing. But smaller firms, the second and third tier subcontractors that make discrete components for larger things, they don't invest in that sort of thing as much. They're much more, and the employees aren't as aware of the threat as well. So the work that we do, looking at their domains, IP addresses, systems associated with the company, email addresses of key employees, and that sort of thing, being able to detect phishing attacks, systems that have been infected and are part of botnets, users who have lost credentials, and that an adversary is using those to make off with plans and details about technical specs about equipment, military equipment, is another big part of our business. It's not everybody is aware of the problems, and consequently they don't invest as much in security. So that's another big area where we see a lot of
so you actually
success stories.
Do you actually look at, if somebody's stolen this technology, this information from my company I'm working for, I'm looking for them using it or applying it somewhere else? Is that what you're looking for, almost like patent infringement?
Well, not necessarily to that extent. So a lot of times people will. So most of it is we're talking about very sophisticated threat actors going against very unsophisticated victims. So once they've breached the system and made off with stuff, it's the barn door horse is gone analogy there, right? And there are a finite number of folks around the world who can make use of certain types of technology, and some of them are kind enough to broadcast what sort of technologies they're actually interested in. So you can it's not proof positive attribution, but that there are only so many people who can do this sort of thing. Really, our role when we discover these sorts of things is helping them, kind of level up their skills and awareness, and pointing out, like, look, you can't. I know you're a 20-person company in the Midwest, and you only make this one thing, and for the government, and it seems like it's an innocuous thing, but if anybody who's familiar with the Target stores breach knows that going after Target would be foolish. Going after a vendor who has a trust relationship with Target is the easier way to go, because he's not going to pay attention to security. These guys operate the same way. Going after a major prime defense contractor would be a colossal waste of time and money and effort. But going after, Bob's widgets, that's trivial, and B, because Bob already is trusted by the prime contractor. Emails from Bob, electronic data transfer, EDI sort of information, pricing, billing, invoices, that sort of stuff. All that sort of stuff is trusted. Nobody thinks twice about clicking on an attachment from Bob, because he's a trusted supplier, and that's how you end up working your way up the food chain.
So that's what you look for when you're looking for those type of intelligence breaches or whatever. So now we were talking about students when we started this conversation, and if they're looking to get into this field, what types of skill sets and what types of training should they be looking to have to be in the threat intelligence industry?
Sure. So definitely, you want to have decent technical skills. You want to be able to understand, the fundamentals about how computers and networks work. You want to be able to understand be able to detect anomalies, not just malicious behavior, but anomalies as well. Because the anomaly, it might just be an anomaly. It might be a malicious thing that nobody's recognized yet. So you need to pay attention to that. Arguably, an equal set of skills that you need to develop is in writing, effectively writing, and effectively speaking. You need to be able to translate. The best analyst is the person who can take all the technical data, all the other sources of information that you use, and fuse that and communicate it in a way that non-technical people will understand. The CEO does not understand. You take a frontline cyber defense person and you put them in the C-suite or the boardroom, they might as well be speaking a foreign language that nobody speaks except that person, right? You have to be able to translate this stuff effectively, and that depends strongly on your writing skills and your verbal communication skills. Develop those skills in parallel with your technical skills. You're going to be a much more valuable resource to employers than just technical stuff.
Okay. So now on the other side of the house, if I am a business owner and I'm listening to this and I'm saying, wow, maybe I have some of these issues that threat intelligence could help with, but I want to look into it myself. How would they get from 0 to 1, kind of doing it themselves, a do-it-yourself project?
Sure. I would start by figuring out, asking yourself, what is it you're trying to protect? and what it is that you care about. Once you understand what that is, you can start evaluating different offerings. Intelligence is not just data. Intelligence is not, we're not at the point where machines can produce intelligence. True intelligence, something that is going to help you make better decisions, has to be run through a human being first, and it has to be put in language and a context that you will understand. So if for people who sell feeds or aggregate feeds and present pretty pictures, that is useful if you have the skills and the knowledge to make sense of that. But if you don't, your emphasis should be on the service provider or the company who can provide you with information in context and in a fashion that you understand. That's real intelligence. If you have a much larger organization, a more sophisticated organization, IT, enterprise, and you need that sort of external data, third-party data to round out the stuff that you're collecting, great, absolutely. But never forget that more as a CEO, you don't need more data, right? You need more pertinent data. You need more focused and specific data to help you make decisions. So yeah, that's what intelligence is about.
So would I think, okay, it's better for me to go out, get one of these flashy feeds and hire somebody to look at it, or start with a company that knows that, it's in the industry of intelligence? What decision would you recommend in that area?
I guess it really boils down to what's your course of action going to be when you discover bad things, right? If it's to accelerate, getting back to work, getting the evil out and getting back to work, then focus on the technical aspects and the data that you need, both internal and external, to help you find bad things and remediate those things so you can get back to work. If you're very insular and focused internally on that sort of thing, if you're more concerned with things that are going on outside your walls and how that can impact you, definitely look at offerings that incorporate data from other sources. So open sources, military, political, economic, people who have expertise or exposure to parts of the world where you do business, or where going back to the supply chain issue. If you've got suppliers in, South America, Asia, and Europe, and you're not looking at those areas for issues that could cause you problems, you're going to be caught by surprise. That's where warning and surprise aspects of intelligence come into play, right? You can be a victim and wait for things to happen to you, or you can be more aware of what's going on in the outside world, and that can help you plan accordingly. So, a good example, a real world example of that is we did a customer who did a fair amount of work in Western Africa, and there was that is not exactly the most stable part of the world. We have sources in that area. We look at political and military issues in that area, in addition to cyber threats, pure play cyber threats. We were to put that information together in a package that allowed our primary customer to make some changes to who supplied them with materials and parts, so that when the worst case scenario happened, which it did, they did not have to worry about suffering a loss of production or a lot of increased costs, because they had already anticipated what the worst case scenario is. They'd already put a deal in place so they could keep their operation running.
So what I'm hearing is you also, not only do you want to think internal versus external, you want to think somebody that's got information, got intelligence, got people on the ground in the parts of the world that you're doing business with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, threat, and so much of cyber intelligence or threat intelligence is just on the cyber, right? And while that's useful to a degree, taken out of context, it doesn't really, it's not as useful as it could be, right? Cyber doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a person, there's a human being behind that activity. Are they state sponsored? Are they proxies? Are they working for economic goals? Are they doing it for fun? Or their own personal enrichment? those are all factors that come into play. There's the cyber component of that is one of those things, but what is their motivation, right? And then, depending on the part of the world, people who do purely cyber attacks and exploitation, cyber crime, they're impacted by the real world too, right? So if there's unrest, there's countries where the government decides for political reasons, we're going to shut off our connectivity to the internet. Well, if you have a hotbed of malicious activity from country X, and the prime minister or the dictator for life shuts off the internet so that people can't get information, so that he's lost the election, so conveniently we're gonna get rid of the opposition, and then we'll turn everything back on, and then we'll tell a story, and maybe people will believe it, probably not, but it doesn't matter. In those few days, nobody's been able to reach out. That impacts the threat environment around the world, because those people are they don't just attack victims here. They do it anywhere where they can get some money. So all those factors come into play. What kind of service you're looking for and what kind of requirements you have depend on who you're going to, who you should talk to about this sort of capability. Like I said, if you're really only insular and reactive, you don't need a very sophisticated service. That's fine. But if you're a larger organization, if you do more international work, and if you're more concerned with the external environment, you definitely have to make sure that you're getting service from someone who has those kind of connections, has those kind of skill sets and awareness, and can put all that information together in context.
Yeah. Well, hey, we're kind of getting close to time on this show, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell our listeners where they might reach out to you, get a hold of you, and what services you can offer them.
Sure. Yeah, happy. So WaPack Labs, we're headquartered out of New Hampshire, but I live in Denver, and we have people all around the country, and we have folks that work for us all around the world. It's WaPackLabs.com, and I am at Mike Tanji at WaPackLabs.com. Happy to talk about to students who are interested in this field, and what they should do, who they should talk to, things that they should pursue, bounce ideas off of. I love helping out the new generation of folks, making sure that their transition to this field is easier than mine was. And then from folks who are interested from a business perspective, I'm happy to talk about what differentiates us, what our capabilities are, and what differentiates us from the other folks in this space.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining today, Mike. It was very informative, and the more people I talk to about threat intel, the more I learn, because I asked all these questions because it was fuzzy to me at first, and I know it is for a lot of people. But thanks for joining today.
Happy to be here. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.